striking thing about Michael is his philanthropy. He's passionate about using his giving to improve lives and catalyze societal change. His foundation focuses on 5 primary areas: that's public health, arts and culture, environment, education, and government innovation. In addition to all of this, he leads a number of bipartisan coalitions that are taking aim at urgent social issues such as illegal guns, immigration reform, infrastructure investment, climate action. He too has an illustrious academic career. He attended Johns Hopkins University, Harvard Business School. He is the father of 2 daughters, Emma and Georgina. I would like all of you to please join me in welcoming Michael Bloomberg and Jennifer Berkeley.
Jennifer, thank you. I must admit, however, that I didn't do all those things. I just assembled a team that did them. So you're very nice to give you credit. It's not deserved. Anyways, I want to congratulate you and Bob for sponsoring this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Florida, for that kind introduction, and to you and Bob for sponsoring this lecture series and bringing us to Aspen for this discussion tonight. I first want to talk a little bit about innovation in local government. When I look at what's happening around the country, particularly in contrast to what's happening in Washington, I see that mayors are really leading the charge in innovation. They're really stepping up to be the problem solvers and gaining national, not just local reputations. What do you think is driving mayors today to be more innovative, to be more creative?
Well, perhaps I'm not totally independent or fair because I was a mayor, I've never been a governor or a president, but they're very different jobs. Mayors deliver services, and the founding fathers had this great concept that there would be 2 legislative bodies, one based on population, one based on geography, and that would give representation to everybody. And in fact, out of that comes chaos and the inability to do anything because eventually they get some things done. But fundamentally, if you have a legislature with that kind of different audiences to serve, it isn't that everybody gets represented, it's that the minority one stops the majority one from getting services. And typically that means the geography one has as much power as the population-based legislative body, but represents a lot fewer people. And if it was done elsewhere, you would think that the court would throw it out. They can't throw it out because it's in the Constitution, although why at a state level it survives, I've never quite figured it out. Mayors are responsible, as LaGuardia said, for picking up the garbage. He said there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up the garbage. But what mayors do, you can measure, and the press can write about it. And so they are more focused on actually producing things and getting results. And you'd never get away with, somebody was running for president of the United States and he said, I voted for the war, but not to fund it. He was talking about Iraq One. Mayors can't do that. Mayors are held accountable. You do, you don't, you are, you ain't. And that's why you see innovation at a city level. That's why you see progress. And it's also because you can measure progress. The public focuses on demanding results from their mayors. Whereas a congressman or a senator, even a governor or a president, you might not agree with them on one issue, but you look at the totality of issues. From their point of view, they look at one issue because they're worried about getting reelected on a small group, whether it's the NRA or the AARP, organizations like that are single issue advocacy groups have disproportionate amount of influence and power. But they don't at the city level. The city level, the public has a better understanding of who the candidates are. They might not elect good people, but they get closer to really understanding what those people can do. And when re-election time comes, they look back and they say, well, he didn't pick up my garbage, he didn't fix the street light, or he didn't improve the school system, and they vote based on that. And you see, the amazing thing to me, America, in a country where the federal government doesn't even acknowledge that climate change is something that's happening, There hasn't been a lot of snow here in a month or two. It's a good example. Or California where there's no water. But nevertheless, in America, we've reduced greenhouse gases by nationwide 5 or 6%. And it's all because it was done by the private sector and cities. Cities went out and forced coal-fired power plants to switch to natural gas or close. And that made an enormous difference. A third of our greenhouse gases come from coal-fired power plants. And the private sector reduced energy consumption. I got nothing but grief and made fun of in the press when I was on the roof of a building in Brooklyn with Al Gore painting the building white. And it turns out if you have a 5-story building, you paint the roof of your building white, your Con Ed bill goes down 25% overnight, because in the summer, you reflect off a lot of the heat. Now, your heating bill will be a little more in the winter, but you save an enormous amount in the summer. Today, if you fly over Queens and Brooklyn, where the buildings are 5 stories and flat roofs, 90%, maybe 95% are painted white. And if you go across the river into New Jersey, where they have a lot of big warehouse kind of buildings with big flat roofs, every one of them has solar power. So it's the private sector, business or individuals, and city governments that are really making a difference. And federal government can't do much, and state governments don't do very much. At best, they can fund the cities, but the innovation takes place with mayors, and when you have a strong mayoral form of government, New York does, which is why the job was really a great job. You could do not everything you wanted, but and there was a legislative body, and there are other courts, but fundamentally, New York City mayor can do an awful lot. That's not true in every city. For example, in California, Los Angeles has this unified school district, and the courts held that the mayor of LA couldn't do anything to improve the schools because he didn't control all of the unified district. He wasn't elected by some people outside of LA. That's stupid design of the system. But if you have a strong mayor, mayors can do things. And this country has an awful lot of good, young, strong mayors. It's really, in the last 10 years, I've been very impressed, and I really am optimistic for cities across the country.
You mentioned sort of constitutional structures and reasons why American mayors are stepping up, but Bloomberg Philanthropy has also done a mayor's challenge in Europe to pull out great innovations that are happening in Barcelona and in other cities. So is there something specific about being a mayor that makes people more innovative, even in different constitutional or different kinds of governmental systems?
I think that running a city is running a city, whether it's a small city or a big city. People want things, they don't want to pay for it. And you have to deal with it in the real world. You listen to people and they rile against one thing, not understanding that the world is very complex and there's no one, you can't just be an absolutist. I was talking to somebody the other day about Russia, and nobody thinks that Russia should be in Ukraine and trying to take land in an independent sovereign country. Except if you really think about it, what would America do if we had a contiguous country where a lot of people in that country wanted to be Americans? Does Texas and California ring a bell? We just went in and took it. Okay, I'm not suggesting that Putin is doing a good thing or he should be allowed, but we did this. Now, it was 200 years ago, but we did it. And you want a warm water port, Guantanamo Bay, ring a bell someplace? We kept that. And sphere of influence, one of the reasons that Putin has reacted the way he did is there was a movement to have NATO be right on the Russian border. If you read Russian history, they have always been invaded, and so they have this mentality of the world was out to get them. And we did the same thing that he insisted on not letting another country come near us with their weapons when we stopped Russia from putting missiles in Cuba. So, it's not so simple to say, let's stop him. And incidentally, Russia has a 2,500-mile border with China, which is one of our great competitors, and nuclear power, and we have to have some kind of balance of power and our ability to influence China. It's got a 3,000-mile border with the whole crazy as an ally in these things. And so the question is, you've got to do something to say to Russia, you can't just go into an independent country and take it over. On the other hand, at the same time, the federal government, I hope, understands that we also need Russia for a lot of the things that we want to do and a lot of other things in the world. And I'm not suggesting a good answer. I'm just pointing out all these things are complex. You get back to cities around the world, they're just like cities in America. A lot of them are much bigger. Tokyo, Yokohama is probably 25 million people. China has 10, 15 cities of over 10 million. We have this, my foundation does two things with cities. One of the things is a competition, which is what you talked about. We did in the United States. 300 cities applied. We whittled it down to 20. We had an award of $5 million for the city that won, and the next four runners up got $1 million apiece. And the idea was that they come up with ideas that would be useful in their city, but also other cities could use. And we did the same thing in Europe. Phenomenally successful, except we had to do it in euros, cost us $4. Although we should have waited till today to pay. It'd be easier. And I'm going next Saturday over to India. Modi desperately wants this nonprofit consulting firm that we started in the foundation to help him with all these cities in India. He's pledged to do something in a country where they can't seem to get their act together. There's enormous inequalities, a lot of non-functioning things. Cities, we can all help each other. And one of the things I'm interested in is trying to get good ideas. But you can have an idea in the United States and it can work in India, it can work in China. There's a lot more commonality.
One of the things that comes along with innovation that's in fact inseparable from innovation is risk. In Silicon Valley, people are quite comfortable talking about failure, that failure is necessary for success. It's not anything necessarily to be ashamed of. There's not necessarily that same spirit animating local government. Mayors don't like to talk about failure. Constituents don't like to put up with failure. Newspapers love failure, right? They love to write about it. But there's not that same tolerance for risk. How do you think mayors and local governments in the United States, or even around the world, could become more comfortable with the idea of trying, failing, pivoting, and trying again?
Well, in science, if you go down a path that turns out to be a dead end, other scientists would say you've done a great thing because you've now freed them from having to explore that possibility and let them devote their resources to other paths that may, in fact, be very productive. If you try this in government, they call you a failure. I am still called, every once in a while somebody writes something about me and say, the mayor that didn't get the Olympics in New York. Thank God we didn't get the Olympics in New York. If we were going to do it with private money, along came the mortgage crisis, and I don't think we could have raised the money. And we, in fact, built every single thing except a velodrome. I don't know what they do with a velodrome. Actually, I do. It's a bicycle thing, or wire. We built 2 new baseball stadiums, a new second Madison Square Garden, another stadium over in New Jersey, all the housing. You know, a lot of things that we were going to use the Olympics as the impetus for infrastructure investment, and we got it done anyways. But press still comes back, we didn't get something. And the elected officials are just petrified that they won't get reelected if the press labels them as a failure. And I would argue that the public's a lot smarter than the press. And in fact, the public would look right through that. And the public wants somebody that actually tries. Now, you can also get the private sector to help, except the private sector can give money for demonstration projects. One time I was out in Sun Valley at a conference, and my then school's chancellor, Joe Klein, was there, and this hedge fund guy comes up and he's got to talk to us. It's critical. It's super secret. So we stand behind a cactus so nobody can hear it. One time in my life I stood behind a cactus. And he said he was going to, in the next 5 years, raise $1 billion to fix public education in America. budget for education is $22 billion. That was the last time we ever heard from him. But private monies can, support charter schools and teachers. We had private money taught principals how to manage. There are a lot of
there's some things that the public has to stand up and do with their own monies. One of the things in New York, Bob Steele came up with the idea. I was always annoyed that I never thought about it. So totally his idea, and a guy named Seth Pinsky. And they came up with an idea that we didn't have enough engineers in New York for local businesses, so why not get engineering schools to open in New York the way there's an engineering school. I can't remember what's that college in Silicon Valley. Begins with an S. And so Bob had a competition, and 30-odd schools applied, and today we have 4 new engineering campuses in New York, which are turning out graduate-level engineers, and Google has an enormous number of people now in New York. All these Silicon Valley companies are opening in New York, or they're moving up to San Francisco. And part of that is that if you're going to build products for the world, you might want to be in some place where the world is, and that's not in Silicon Valley. It's in big cities, and creative people want to live, I think, in a place where there's competition and the arts and a lot of other things that make human experience better. If you want to play golf and ride a bicycle, Silicon Valley is great. I'm not knocking, there's a lot of great businesses there, and Stanford is one of the great universities in the world. But nevertheless, New York's great strength is its diversity, its population. And now Columbia's built a great big new campus. Carnegie Mellon has a new campus. NYU Poly has a new campus. And Cornell was the winner of the competition, and they got half of a big island in the East River. And the day they announced it, they announced the first check they've gotten from a donor was $350 million, and they've raised an awful lot of money since then. And they're going to build 4 or 5 buildings, and they're already going. They started the engineering school right away in sort of Google space. So it's going to help New York City for decades, and that was the private sector. But there was a government involvement. The government involvement, most importantly, was Steele and Pinsky, who came up with the idea, and then the city contributed land and some infrastructure expenses.
Why did you decide, one of the noteworthy things about the Applied Sciences effort was that it was structured as this national competition. You didn't go to the local New York universities and say, you need to juice up your engineering programs. You said, we are going to put New York on the map as a place that is interested in competing for tech talent. Why the competition angle?
Well, I don't think that we're smart enough to pick who the best engineering schools are, or who the best engineering schools are going to be. There's lots of good ideas. There's lots of great faculty around. Cornell is a New York institution, one of the original land-grant colleges, thanks to Abraham Lincoln. One of the things Lincoln did not give some credit for was the 7 land-grant schools that made an enormous difference in our society. NYU and Columbia, as I said, have new campuses. Stanford was in the running until at the very end, and then they pulled out. They had a lot of resistance from, I think, the humanities faculty, who just didn't want campus on the other side of the country. They thought it would split up a lot of their efforts in California. I think it would have been great to send out. And the engineering faculty, when they surveyed it, I think better than 50% made a fuss. I have to be in the first group to go to New York if we win this. And it made a lot of sense for them, rather than do campus overseas, which they haven't done, but a lot of other schools have, to be in a place 3,000 miles away with good transportation, same language, same culture, basically. The beneficiaries of them not coming were Cornell, who won the competition, and some of the East Coast schools, which I think were very worried that if Stanford came, there would be real competition. Harvard, MIT, schools like that. They didn't need more competition on the East Coast. And in the end, they didn't get it, but I think it would have been great for Stanford. It would have been great for New York, and
hope that both Cornell and Stanford, those two finalists, would have won, but Cornell stood.
One of the themes that's come through so far in the conversation is the engagement of philanthropy, business, and government kind of working together to change what happens in our cities. There's obvious benefits from that in that you get fresh ideas, you get sometimes more rigorous analytical perspectives, you get projects that would not have happened otherwise. On the other hand, you do have these difficult questions about democratic accountability when you're mingling public, private, and philanthropic dollars. How do you think these things through? Is the game so unquestionably worth it, or do you ever think that we need to have, I don't know, different understandings of governance and government so that these are a little more in line with what we learned in our civics textbooks about how government should operate?
Well, I don't think you lose democracy just because someone is willing to give some money and do something. Barry Diller has given, I think, like $125 million to build a pier out into the Hudson River that would have a facility where we get concerts and that sort of thing. He's funding it all, and there are people that say, oh, we shouldn't take his money because it's not democratic. Well, the taxpayers don't have the money to do some of these things. There's nothing wrong with that. I've always been annoyed people criticize David Koch. The Kochs are very conservative. They've got a right to advance their views. That's what democracy is all about. I don't agree with them most times, but there's nothing wrong with somebody who's willing to put their own money and try to get people elected, have similar views. That's what the democratic process is. There are a lot of people that say that Kochs, nobody should take money from the Kochs. You'd be hard-pressed to find a hospital in a major city that doesn't have a Koch building. And think about the amount of research done and the number of lives saved because of their generosity. And I just find that crazy not to take money from, if somebody wants to give money and it suits, it's a need. The public should have a right to say we need it, we don't need it, but if we didn't have private philanthropy, the arts would not be in most places in America. Science would be way behind. The medical care you would get would be a lot worse. We all benefit from all of that. And, democracy is, it's not a pure form of government. You can't have a republic where you vote on every single thing. And I think that I don't see any real conflicts. Some people that don't like charter schools. Why? Because private money is going into charter schools. If people want to spend some money to improve the education for our kids, what I miss here, this is not hard to argue it's a bad thing unless you're the teachers union, which is where all of the objections come from.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the challenges and opportunities that cities and regions are facing, which is immigration. While mayors and businesses and philanthropies can do a lot in cities, they don't set our national immigration policy. So what do you think mayors and local leaders, how do you think they should engage on the issue of immigration?
Well, I think we all just have to keep banging on the federal government. If you want to rule in this country, our current immigration laws would be a good place to start. We have people who get a great education here and then can't get a green card, so they go overseas, and they not only create industries that we'll never get back, and jobs that we need to never get here, they also go and improve higher education elsewhere around the world. And America, still to this day, the jewel in our education crown is graduate education. But if we were to lose that, then we really have an awful lot worse future than if we were to do what made sense, let people come here. A number of years ago, Detroit was in real trouble, and I was asked, what could you do for Detroit? And this television show. And I hadn't really thought about it much, but I just said, we don't have a lot of money, but we have one thing that really would attract people, and that's American citizenship. We don't understand just how valuable that is to people who are outside the United States who don't have American citizenship. And what we should do is we should offer citizenship to people who can come and start businesses, and the deal would be you don't take any state, city, federal help, you gotta stay out of jail, you gotta create a business, and if 7 years from now you did it, we'll just give you a new family citizenship. And we can afford to do it because you know, more citizenship is not going to change the country, but it's not going to change the demographics of the country. And the mayor of Detroit said, it was his name was Bing, he was a basketball player, I know that about him. And he said, oh, man, Bloomberg doesn't understand, we don't have any jobs in Detroit, so we shouldn't bring immigrants here. He was certainly right about the first part. They don't have any jobs. And they are never going to get any jobs, if you think about it, unless you do something like this. Why would any rational person move to a city in so much trouble? Having said that, we've got to help Detroit. And in all fairness, the Republican mayor, Snyder, Rick Snyder, that's his name, has done an awful lot working with Detroit. Yes. And Eli Road has raised $100 million of private philanthropy money to help the Detroit school system and all these things. And he glommed on it right away and said we should do it. The trouble is there's a national immigration bill which you need, and so far these crazies on both sides of the aisle just don't want it. We blame the Republicans for not giving us an immigration bill, but if you think about it, immigration means two things. One, it means jobs. The other thing it means is family reunification. The Democrats want the latter, Republicans want the former, and that's one of the reasons why they're not going to pass a bill at the moment. Maybe they will come to their senses and do something, but what we will do is we'll say, okay, you can have immigrants from, and then we'll cherry pick where they can come from because their constituents here, whose elected officials want to be able to go home and say, I deliver this. We're not going to do it just based on who's good for the country. Canada has, I don't know, 70% are of the green cards, whatever the equivalent is in Canada that they give out, are based on what's good for Canada, and the other 20 or 30% is based on what's good for the elected officials in the United States to be just the reverse.
My friends in Detroit who might see this on video would be very upset with me if I didn't talk a little bit about how actually Detroit has done quite well, in part in following New York's lead in focusing on innovation. So they're doing a little bit better, certainly than they were. Than they were several years ago. But one of the things that is kind of an issue in Detroit and an issue in New York and an issue in a lot of the cities around the country is income inequality. And several years ago, there were a lot of discussions saying mayors can't do that much about inequality. They don't set national kind of redistribution, tax policy. What do you think mayors should do about income inequality?
Well, mayors can do a lot about income inequality. If you have a mayor, all he's got to do or she's got to do is bring crime back to the streets, and you'll solve your inequality problem. Not the way you want to do it, but I'm telling you that you will do that right away because the wealthy who can afford to leave will leave. It's the poor that can't afford to leave. In New York, we always have policies trying. We would love to get every billionaire in the world to move to New York, bring their money, buy housing, spend money decorating it, go to fancy restaurants, buy clothing, go to the theater, join the philanthropic groups in New York. I'd love to get more billionaires coming to New York. Does that give you more inequality? Yes, it does. But the problem is not the very wealthy that we want. I'd rather have them in our city than in some other city. It is the fact that we have done a terrible job of educating our people for the kind of jobs that they can have and make a decent living, and haven't attracted those businesses to these centers. So the inequality numbers where you say, oh, a very small percentage of people have an enormous amount of wealth, yes. My mind boggles when you see somebody who makes $10 billion as a hedge fund guy. But, you know, that's if they take that money and then give it away, I'm not so sure that I would rather have them here than elsewhere. The poor in the United States need better education, and they need better leadership. And before I got out, I read a book of Why the Poor Stay Poor. And it's always the poor that get screwed. They always get screwed in the name of the poor. And we have program after program which we spend money on at the federal, state, and city level, and we've been doing it for decades, things that don't work, and we never stop them and move money to things that do work. If you want to know the differences between the private sector and the public sector, one of the key differences in the private sector, if a company has a product that's selling and a product that's not selling, they'll move the resources from the product that's not selling over to the product that is selling. In government, we do exactly the reverse. Literally, we move monies from programs that work to programs that are shown they cannot work because we're the real driving force of the people that work for government that produce or deliver the services that we're talking about. Not the recipients of the services, the people that deliver the services. That's the unionized workforce, and they get out the vote, and the poor do not know how to get out the vote. That's a problem, but the providers of the service always force governments to go in the right direction. It's really very sad.
So what are the things that do work? What should we be putting more money into because they do change people's lives and help them get themselves out of poverty?
Conventional wisdom is education, and education is not going to help anybody that's an adult now. Nobody goes back to school. That's just ridiculous. It doesn't happen. But the kid that starts in kindergarten today, his or her future depends on us improving the school system, but it'll take a long time. What we should be doing as you get up the educational chain is focusing on the kind of education that will help people be able to have the dignity of being self-supporting, the dignity of a job. And if your son or daughter has a chance of going next year to Harvard College or becoming a plumber, I would suggest that the plumbing career might be something that he or she should certainly think about. A Harvard graduate on average will never catch up to a plumber. Partially because the first 4 years, instead of spending 60 grand, you make 60 grand, but also plumbers have pricing power. You have to have a plumber when the pipe breaks, and you can't farm it out, and it's not likely to be replaced with technology anytime soon. Whereas an awful lot of the jobs that kids who come out of schools today, particularly liberal arts majors, used to get, those jobs have either gone away or they've gone down in value to society. And you've got to ask yourself, why do we have this phenomenon of improved productivity in this country, but wages don't go up? And my explanation would be that technology, well, the agrarian society was designed to produce jobs. And for 3,000 years, we could train you to be a farmer. You dig a hole, you put the seed in, you add dirt and water, off comes the corn, you eat it. And then we had the industrial society, you put the piece of metal on the lathe and you turn the crank in the direction. Or we teach you how to, with your hands, be a carpenter and carve things, or the skill sets. But we could teach you processes for both the agrarian and the industrial society. In knowledge society, there are no processes that you can teach. You can't answer the mother's question, how much does my child have to learn before they can go back to playing Angry Birds and watching television? And you say, lady, I don't know a Nobel Prize winner that isn't still learning afterwards, and they just cannot understand that. There has to be, we have to have an answer in this country, a finite thing. But the trouble is, there is no finite thing. And it's not clear to me that our schools can teach or that the average person can learn the skill sets to be at the top end intellectually of the knowledge society. The people that build the systems. Now, if you go to the people that are going to operate the systems, think about it. If you hit the wrong button, the computer says, no, you did something wrong. That never happened before when you were doing things with your hands. And so the skill sets that you needed before, I would argue, I don't want to generalize too much, but in a lot of cases, it really is true. It is the pricing power of the workforce is it's down because of technology. We're making things easier to do. Technology is the gatekeeper. Technology is keeping us from making mistakes. And that would explain why productivity up and middle class wages down. Go take a look at law firms. 40% decline in the number of people that have gone to law schools over the last 3 or 4 years. Why? Because two things. One, you automated all the research. And two, the law profession did what I think is one of the dumber things any industry has ever done. They listened to their customers. And the customers wanted an itemized bill. And law firms traditionally just gave you a bill at the end of the year of services or once a month, you know, it's this, but never itemized it. And when they started to itemize it, all of a sudden the company said, wait a second, I gave that deposition last week. You mean to tell me the guy asking the questions, the partner was billing us $800 an hour, and those four sycophants around him, I'm paying them $200 an hour? What on earth what am I getting for my money? And so all of a sudden, they just refused to pay. Whereas law business for a long, long time had it pretty cushy. They kept control and kept internal the knowledge of how their economics work. Now, you know, you can shoot about this, and we have a right to know that they didn't have to do that. My company, I was want to know what we're getting for our money as well. But the world is changing, and how you make a living it's easy to say education, but I would argue vocational education for an awful lot of people would be a better ways to go. Back in the 60s in New York City, they closed all the vocational schools. Why? Because somebody said, what do you mean my son or daughter is not going to go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton? And nobody had the guts to turn to the mother or father and say, hey, your kid can't even read. He's 12 years old. He's never going to get to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. We didn't want to do that. Everybody had a right. And I think a little bit of it comes from, you got to decide, if you're a populist, you basically believe in equal results rather than equal opportunity. And that's a battle that's being fought out today, not just in America, but around the world, in more advanced societies. But certainly in America, we have a populist president. In New York State, we have a populist governor. In New York City, we have a populist mayor. And the argument would be, if the results aren't equal, then the opportunities weren't equal. And America was always founded on equal opportunity, but not equal results. We do have to find ways to help people. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't, but to order the tides to stop is not going to do anybody any good. You have to come up with some real things. One of the things that Bob Steele and his predecessor, Dan Doctoroff, did in New York City is they tried to focus on creating jobs that fit the skill sets of the people who lived there, not people who didn't live there, but people who lived there. And the first thing they did is focus on tourism. New York City has, I don't know, I think this year it's 56 million tourists. There are 100,000 hotel rooms. Every hotel room creates 2.5 jobs, making beds and serving food in the restaurant and driving the cab and those kinds of things. And you say, oh, well, those are not good jobs. A waitress in the Grand Ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria makes $150,000 a year by contract, because it's a venue that doesn't exist elsewhere, so they can fill it with corporate events every night, and they have a good union leader, very strong back Peter Ward, and that's what's negotiated. But a waiter and a waitress in a decent restaurant in New York will make $50,000, $60,000 a year. So it's creating jobs for the people that need those jobs. And then you do want to attract the overseas immigrants who will come and start businesses. Something like 40% of all companies in America have been started by immigrants or the first generation. And you do want to have lots of opportunities to share things and to try new things. But if you want to fix society's problems, you can start with education, but you've got to do something about the people that who are out there without an education. We're going to pay for the sins of never giving them a good education. In America, our school system used to be in the top, nationwide, we're in the top 10% worldwide. And today we're lucky to be in the top 50. We're just going downhill with an enormous pace. Colorado is actually a state, and just to begin with, that have done some pretty good work on education and trying to have teacher evaluation and that sort of thing. Tennessee, Colorado, one other state's done some pretty good work, not New York City. We did make a big improvement in the number of kids graduating. You can make the case that they don't have the skill sets to get jobs and they still need more remedial work, but at least they're staying in school. And we have an enormous group of people in this country who are so disaffected, no contact with the school system, no contact with their religious organizations, no contact with their families, and it's a real time bomb for us, and that's one of the big problems.
So I'll press you on that a little bit. What do you think mayors, philanthropies, businesses can do with those folks who have left the education system and haven't kind of engaged? They're not firing on all cylinders. What do we offer them in the name of either not of equality of opportunity or even basic fairness to make up for the way that they've been failed before?
Controversial, but the first thing is all of your 95% of your murderers and murder victims fit one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minorities, 15 to 25. That's true in New York, it's true in virtually every city in America. And that's where the real crime is. You've got to get the guns out of the hands of the people that are getting killed. First thing you can do to help that group is keep them alive. And if you, the psychologists that will interview these kids, they talk, the kids think they're going to get killed anyways because all their friends are getting killed. So they just don't have any long-term focus or anything. It's a joke to have a gun. It's a joke to pull a trigger. And in New York, before Reacher, the guy got elected, we had 2,300 murders. When he left office, that was down to 660 murders. When I left office, it was down to 333 murders a year. And it's all the same group. Nobody in New York gets murdered unless, if you get murdered, the first thing you want to do is what are you selling or who are your family members? Because it just has to be you're a drug dealer or you have domestic abuse, a family quarrel. There's just no other kind of murder whatsoever. So, but in other cities where they haven't gone after scaring the kids to get guns out of them, a lot of people don't like the fact that that's what you do, but that's what Stop and Frisk is all about. And that's what you have to do is you have to spend money on your police department. In New York City, we spend $8.5 billion a year. You have to make sure you have to incarcerate fewer people. We brought down the incarceration rate by a third. You send a young kid to jail, we don't correct them, although we call it the corrections department. We teach them how to be a worse person when he came in. And by 2 or 3 times, then he really does have a gun, stop killing people. So you want to spend the money, put a lot of cops in the street, put those cops where the crime is, which means in minority neighborhoods. So it's one of the unintended consequences is people say, oh my God, you are arresting kids for marijuana that are all minorities. Yes, that's true. Why? Because we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the first thing you can do for people is to stop them getting killed. We did a calculation, I forget how many people who would have been dead if we hadn't gotten guns, have brought down the murder rate and gotten guns off the streets. And the ways you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them up against the wall and frisk them. And then they say, oh, I don't want that, I don't want to get caught, so they don't bring the gun. They may still have a gun, but they leave it at home. And in December of 2 Decembers ago, my last year in office, some minister from a Black Baptist church in Harlem invited me to come speak about Stop and Frisk. And I've never turned down an opportunity to explain to the public what we're doing. Sometimes people like it, sometimes they don't. But I went, and while I'm sitting there on stage waiting for him to introduce me, he said to his congregation, if every one of you stopped and frisked your kid before they went out at night, the mayor wouldn't have to do it. And so I knew I was going to be okay in that audience. But, if there is a constitutional issue, we've always thought we were on the right side of it. The courts let us do it. One judge ruled against it. By the time I was out of office, my successor decided not to appeal his decision. But you have to do something. And another after-school basketball program is just not going to work on something. These kids have no contact with basketball. And giving money to the church always is going to have another program and say, these kids have no connection with the church. But we'll have the families do something. These kids don't have families. I mean, it's just a group that's so disaffected. And so if you say, what can you do for them? And I hate to waste all this time on one thing. But if you can stop them from getting murdered, I would argue everything else you do is less important.
We've got time for one last question from me, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. You've covered an enormous range of policy topics. What's the one piece of advice that you would give a new mayor?
Well, you got to be yourself. I mean, I'm a believer that the public is a lot smarter than the press thinks they are, and that if you stand up and you say, look, I'm trying to do this, and it ain't easy, and don't put out glowing press releases, but you can say, you know, we've made a little bit of progress, but we need more help. Sometimes you get thrown out of office, but more often than not, people will come to appreciate you, think you're genuine, and stay with you. And then you've got to attack problems that you really have. And it is crime, it is job creation, it is education, it is delivering public health services. And you're not going to get a lot of help from your state. You're not going to get much help at all from your federal government. But you can rally the troops. You can attract good people. It's interesting. We had people that we've attracted into New York City government. Bob Steele's a good example. I mean, who would have thought somebody from previous background would come and work in New York City and deal with, when I called him and I said, I'd love you to work for us. And by the way, you get a lot of money, so I'm not going to pay you. You get $1 a year, just like me, because I want to use that money to pay others. He said, why should I do it? I said, because you have a chance to change the world. And he goes like this, and I'm in. And he went out and actually dealt with the real world. And you've got to have their backs. You've got to protect them when what they're trying to do doesn't work. And promote them. I try to do the same thing in my company. But you got to have a team, because no mayor can do it all by themselves. In fact, mayor's jobs are really to get the right people that have the expertise and protect them and get them funded and solve jurisdictional disputes and political problems. And when the shit hits the fan, stand up and say, don't blame them, blame me. And a lot of elected officials don't do that because they want to get reelected. But if you want to be successful, I think that's the way to do it. I don't know if it's the only answer. I could just tell you it worked for 12 years. So.
Well, you are very clearly always yourself, and great to hear.
That was a wise ass when I was 4 and 26.
Great. So I think there is a team with mics walking around, and I will let them, okay, great.
Hi, I'm wondering, Mayor, as a mayor who worked hard to help New Yorkers avoid unhealthy behaviors like big gulps and salt and smoking cigarettes, what do you think of Colorado legalizing marijuana?
I think it is just a terrible, terrible idea. I cannot imagine, what are we going to say in 10 years when you see all these kids whose IQs are 5 and 10 points lower than they would have been? Kids' brains are being formed while they are teenagers. The easier it is to get marijuana, and even if you have a law that says I'm not going to sell it to them, let's get serious. If there's more of it around, they're going to get it. I just can't imagine why society is doing this. I couldn't feel more strongly about it. And my girlfriend says, oh, it's no different than alcohol. It is different than alcohol. This is one of the stupider things that's happening across our country. We are walking away this libertarian thing. Everybody has the right to do anything, no matter how unhealthy progress in reducing obesity and diabetes. We are making progress in reducing automobile deaths and a variety of other things. But the marijuana thing goes exactly in the other direction. And why people here in Washington State, it's happening in New York too. There's this medical marijuana. And it isn't like, you know, I don't know, I'm about to be 73, so if you're my age, of course you smoked a joint in the 60s, but it was very different, and it wasn't, just because we did it doesn't make it right. And it was not easily accessible compared to today. And so, you know, today it's much stronger and potentially much more damaging. We have somebody here whose hands been up since the beginning.
My question, is it on? My question was triggered by the first 2 minutes of this interview, and I've been bugged by it all for the whole 45 minutes. My question is as follows: a genie comes to you and grants you 3 wishes. Would one of those wishes be a unicameral government? Unicameral, you're not exposed to bicameral. And what might 2 other wishes be?
Well, I'm going to tell you a joke about the genie. It's for some reason I got it right. I got reconstructed while I'm answering your question in my mind. But I think that having one part of government dependent on geography, the other on population, is not democratic. We either believe in one man, one vote, one man, a woman, one vote. Or you don't. And it is true that you would probably have less money invested in the more rural areas. On the other hand, a lot more people live in cities. The estimates are 70% of the world's population will live in cities by the year 2050, which isn't that far away. And, you know, it's great that we build national parks and roads in rural areas and that sort of thing. I'm not opposed to that. And I think as a society we should do it. But it should be the public that decides to do that. You can believe in democracy, you don't. I think the joke is the following. It's too good a joke not to Genie appears and says, I'll give you 3 wishes, but whatever I give you, I'm going to give double to your wife. And I know you and your wife are not getting along and are going to get divorced. So the guy says, oh, okay. He said, I want $1 billion. And the genie said, fine. And your wife gives $2 billion. He says, okay. He says, I want a 5 handicap and my golf game. And the genie says, okay, your wife gets 2.5 handicap. And what's your 3rd thing? The guy says, I want a mild heart attack.
I don't know how you're going to top that, but go ahead and try.
Mr. Bloomberg, thank you for your evocative and stimulating comments and your humor, too. I would like to ask if you could come back to a comment you made earlier relative to philanthropy, specifically concentrations of wealth and influence, but translate that into the political sphere. I believe I heard you say that there should be no, and relative to the Koch brothers, I just wonder if you could expound on that a bit. You're very active, which is welcome, as it is welcome of the Kochs to the extent that their voices are no greater than times.
Well, I was really annoyed. I give a lot of money to Udall, who never called to thank me, incidentally. So okay, I understand that. But he riled against billionaires giving money. Never turned down a check I gave him. I just want to point out. So, and incidentally, the Democrats raised more money than Republicans. So, you know, it's hard to argue, to come up with laws that say where you can and can't spend your money. To me, the most important thing is that it's disclosed who is spending the money. And then you can make your decisions. And, you know, if you limit some people giving monies, how do campaigns get financed and how do people get the message out? So it's not perfect, and I understand that, But George Soros is, I once said to George, I said, how's my breakfast? And I said, you're exactly like David Koch. And he just went down my throat. How dare you say that? I said, no, you're giving your money to push your views, so maybe they have money to push their views. And I don't necessarily agree with David Koch on anything, but he's a very generous guy. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know how to write the law, and in a practical sense, the law is not going to be written. Supreme Court said everybody has a right to do it. And that's, like it or not, we are in a country of laws, and we're not going to change the Constitution. So the only way she will stop that is if another court later on in another decision would rule differently. And I don't know that that's likely to happen.
Bloomberg, we spoke recently, as you know, the U.S. State Department opened the first diplomatic mission in Aspen, which happened to be the Lithuanian consulate. As you know, I'm happy to be the first consulate here. Hillary Clinton thought it was a good idea, so I've got some weight behind me. I feel like I'd like to ask you a question. You touched on Eastern Europe a little bit with the Ukraine. Do you have any plans, because Lithuania and the Baltic states would certainly love you to come visit personally? You've been identified as a person that we'd love to see there. It opened up a center there in a country that's a strong democracy, emerging market, and would love to see you there.
Well, nice to do that. Most of my philanthropy in helping cities originally thought about basically in America. But we, as I said, did a European competition. I think we're going to wind up doing something for India. And just a limited number of things we can do. But keep in mind, it's up to the American public if they want to spend their money on foreign aid, and we should insist on getting value for our foreign aid. We've not done a very good job in terms of helping those people around the world who really need help. We promise money, all these countries promise money to Haiti, for example, after they had that terrible earthquake. They never got any of it. Virtually none of it. We have these announcements and we never follow through with any of the stuff. We have announcements that come out of, state houses and the federal government. We're going to do this to help the poor, not the poor. They never get funded. They never get implemented. Laws never get the details, the implementation of the laws ever done. It's also true that individuals shouldn't be conducting foreign policy. If you don't like the foreign policy of this country, then elect different people. But and we've had some absolutely brilliant secretaries of state, and then we've had some that have really not done anything. We've had presidents that have changed the fabric of America and the world. My favorite president has always been Harry Truman. Harry Truman integrated the Army, changed the social fabric of America. No other president would have had the guts to do that. Maybe Lyndon Johnson, you can argue he did that with the Voting Rights Act. But Harry Truman did that. Harry Truman had a Marshall Plan. If we had a Marshall Plan after World War I, you wouldn't have World War II. First time the victors took care of the vanquished rather than squeezing them. Harry Truman stood up for democracy and fired Douglas MacArthur. And inconceivable that anybody else would have the guts to do that. Douglas MacArthur was a god. Harry Truman was a haberdasher. He said, I'm president. Civilians run this government. Threw him out. Dropping a bomb, anybody would have done that. We're in war and invading the home islands would have cost a lot of American troops. But there are very few presidents since then that have passed seminal pieces of legislation that have changed the world. But every once in a while we get somebody that does it.
We have time for one more question, and the microphone is going to the left.
Thank you very much for this evening. I'm Ginny Galitza now. And as you know, college education, the cost of it is so expensive for parents who are putting their kids through college, young adults who are putting themselves through college, and also for those who are in their 50s or 40s who are starting a second career. What are your thoughts on how to make college education more affordable?
In the interest of full disclosure, I used to be chairman of the board of Johns Hopkins. I always thought that we should raise the tuition as high as we because college tuition is a Robin Hood plan. You want to take as much money as you can from the wealthy families whose students you take and use it to subsidize those kids who don't have the luck to come from a wealthy family. And all the scholarship aid's got to come from someplace, so you don't want to leave any money on the table. The students always rile against higher tuition, but the truth of the matter is it is a great transfer of wealth between the parents of wealthy students and the parents of poor students. What you do want to make sure is that universities and colleges take the best and the brightest to give them an education. Now, you got to start with this whole discussion is what's the purpose of higher education? Is it to produce the next group of Nobel Prize winners, or is it to give everybody a level of education up to here, some level? And I think it depends on the school, which they're going to do. A lot of schools are never going to produce Nobel Prize winners, never going to produce Rhodes Scholars, like like Jennifer's Rhodes Scholar. I couldn't spell Rhodes, just to put it in. And Soledad talked about my academic record. My academic record, every place I went to school, was I always made the top half of the class possible. It's actually true. Universities, some people think MOOCs, where one professor online pontificates about something and everybody can take the course, and it doesn't cost very much, obviously, if you distribute over the internet. The trouble is that nobody seems to take these courses, or very few, and actually learn anything. And part of education is not in the classroom, it's going to school, hopefully living on campus, because I think that is a good thing. I know some kids have to live at home, but I always thought it would be great if everybody could live on campus, because then they are away from their parents for probably the first time in their lives, and they learn how to be adults. And they make mistakes, but hopefully on campus they're not tragic things that they don't recover from. And that's part of education as well. Education costs a lot. Why? Generally, schools don't have big hunting lodges for the trustees. But one of the things they do is they build fancy